Dogs are called man's best friend for a reason. They will sacrifice themselves if it means saving the ones they love. Here are 3 horrifying stories that would have turned out tragic had a dog not been around. The Guardian in the Basement, by Michael. I had to watch after my sister when my parents were out one night. I wouldn't be out anyway, though. I was busy playing the current hot game that had just come out at the time. My dog Sheriff was laying next to me when he lifted his head up and his ears twitched. You know that thing dogs do when they hear something. I paused the game to see if I could hear what he was listening for. I didn't hear anything and lost interest, assuming it was someone walking their dog outside or something. Sheriff jumped off the bed and ran out the half-open door to the bedroom. He was barking, going crazy at something. I didn't care to follow him. I simply yelled at him to shut up, but eventually his normal, annoying barking suddenly turned crazed and defensive, as if he were confronting something or someone. That's when I got suspicious and ran to go see what it was. I heard Sheriff's nails scrape the basement steps as he flew down the stairs. My heart sank as I realized he must have been chasing something. I found myself standing at the top of the basement steps for a whole minute, staring into the darkness below. The air felt thick and heavy as I struggled to breathe. Gathering up the courage to go down there, I finally did, turning the light on the way down. Sheriff was standing by the door to the laundry room, his hackles raised and teeth bared. I didn't even dream of opening that door. I trusted in him enough to believe that someone was in there. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as a chill ran down my spine. I struggled, but eventually picked him up and ran with him all the way back upstairs. As I was about to shut the light, I heard the sound of the laundry room door creaking open. At that instant, I slammed the basement door shut and locked it. I listened for a few moments with my ear against the door, and I could hear barely over the sound of Sheriff barking the sound of the steps squeaking. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I dove for the phone and called the police. When they arrived, they caught him trying to bust out through the basement window. Me and my sister watched as the officers walked him out to the car, and I'll never forget the dreadful stare the man gave me as he was forced into the back seat of the police car. But I'll also never forget how grateful I was to have Sheriff with me that night. As I hugged Sheriff tight that night, I remembered a verse my grandmother often recited. And whoever puts their trust in Allah, then He will suffice him. The Attic Intruder, by S. Bennett. I used to have a Beagle Pointer mix before she passed away at the age of 11. Her name was Mandy, and she was the sweetest and most loyal dog a person could ask for. She would never harm a fly, but she did have a big troublemaking mouth. So the story goes, I was 15 years old getting ready for sleep one night like any other night. Mandy slept in my room, and when I walked into my room, finally ready to crash in bed, I was greeted to Mandy growling. She wasn't looking at anything in particular. I playfully asked her what was wrong, and she just made an annoyed doggy sound before putting her head down. I found it funny. For the good hour of me rolling around, trying to fall asleep, Mandy would constantly break the silence with growling. I would peek at her, but she would still have her head down. She showed no reaction to me offering to take her out, so I could check that off the list. It quickly went from cute and funny to just annoying, but I eventually fell asleep. The room was pitch black and eerily quiet, except for Mandy's occasional low growls. I woke up to see that it was 2 a.m. and Mandy was growling. I tried to adjust my eyes in the dark, and I could eventually see Mandy standing in the middle of the room. She was looking up at my closet door. I felt my heart begin to race. What I was witnessing was flat-out disturbing. The moonlight cast long shadows across the room, making everything look distorted and menacing. I turned on the lamp and watched as Mandy continued to stare up at the elevated closet. I don't know what I was thinking, but I decided to open up the closet and check what she was barking at. I want to note right now I have one of those closets that lead to an attic. When I checked, there was nothing in the closet, but I noticed the attic door was cracked open. You can imagine the fear in my body as I ran to my parents' room to get my dad. He didn't seem to take me too seriously until he got to my room and saw Mandy growling and looking up at my closet. My dad is a big guy, so he went in there without a weapon. I sat there worried for what was to come next. The silence was deafening as I waited, holding my breath. What came next was my dad screaming at the top of his lungs at somebody. I heard boxes fall over and glass shatter as my dad moaned in apparent pain. Somebody was rushing out of the closet. I hoped it was my dad, but instead some 6'5" man with a hammer in his hand jumped out from the closet and past me. What happened next still surprises everyone. Mandy jumped up and grabbed a hold of the man's arm with her teeth. The scream of the unfamiliar voice filled the room. My dad came rushing out of the closet just in time to jump onto the intruder, taking him down. He sent my mom to fetch my little brother's prop handcuffs. My dad held him down while I handcuffed him. Thankfully, he was sent to jail. I don't know what his intentions were, but obviously if he had a hammer with him, he probably wasn't just planning on robbing us. If we didn't have Mandy at that time, I could only imagine what would have happened to our family. As the police led the intruder away, I hugged Mandy tight, whispering a prayer of thanks. The words of the Quran echoed in my mind, and Allah is the best of protectors, and He is the most merciful of those who show mercy. The Silent Guardian, by James. It was a typical Friday night, and I was home alone with my German Shepherd Max. My wife and kids were out of town visiting relatives, and I was looking forward to a quiet evening catching up on some work. Max was always a calm and obedient dog, but that night he seemed unusually alert. As I sat at my desk, Max kept pacing back and forth between the living room and the front door. His ears perked up and his tail stiff. I tried to ignore his behavior at first, chalking it up to him missing the rest of the family. But as the night wore on, his agitation only increased. He would stand at the window, staring intently into the darkness outside, then rush to my side as if trying to communicate something urgent. I started to feel uneasy. The house seemed too quiet, the shadows too deep. I found myself straining to hear what might be setting Max off, but all I could hear was the faint ticking of the clock and the occasional creak of the old house settling. Around midnight, I decided to do a quick check of the property, just to ease my mind. I grabbed a flashlight, and with Max at my side, we stepped out onto the front porch. The night air was cool and still. As I swept the beam of light across the yard, I saw nothing out of the ordinary, but Max was rigid, his hackles raised, as he stared fixedly at a point beyond the beam of my light. Suddenly he let out a low, menacing growl that made my blood run cold. That's when I saw it, a flicker of movement in the shadows near the garage. My heart began to race as I realized we weren't alone. Before I could react, Max shot off the porch like a bullet, racing towards the intruder. I heard a shout of surprise, followed by the sound of running feet. Max's fierce barking echoed through the night as he chased the would-be burglar off our property. Shaken, I quickly retreated inside, locking the door behind me. I called the police, who arrived within minutes to search the area. They found evidence that someone had been attempting to break into our garage, likely planning to then enter the house. If it hadn't been for Max's vigilance, who knows what might have happened. As I sat there in the quiet aftermath, my hand buried in Max's fur, I was reminded of the hadith. Whoever believes in Allah and the last day should not harm his neighbor. I silently thanked Allah for sending me such a faithful protector in Max. That night changed everything. We installed a security system the very next week, but I knew that no technology could ever replace the loyalty and instincts of a good dog. Max had saved more than just our possessions. He had protected our sense of safety and peace of mind. From that day forward, he slept in our room, a silent guardian, always alert, always ready to defend his family. And though years have passed, I still sometimes wake in the night, listening for any sound that might be out of place, grateful beyond words for the four-legged hero who watches over us as we sleep. The Street Stalker, by Jake. I was only 11 years old, and my brother was only 8. We were walking our dog Buster around the block in the dark. Buster was a husky German Shepherd mix with a thick coat that seemed to glow in the moonlight. The crisp night air nipped at our faces as we turned the corner to the other side of the block. That's when we ran into him, a tall man who greeted us with an unsettling smile. He stopped in his tracks and seemed to expect us to do the same. There was something off about the way he looked at us, like we were prey. The man tried to start a conversation, but we just kept walking past. My little brother's hand tightened around mine as we quickened our pace. I could feel Buster's muscles tensing through the leash, sensing our unease. My brother kept looking back, telling me that the man was following us. A chill ran down my spine as I realized he was right. Each time I turned around, the man was the same distance from us, but he would stop looking whenever we looked. It was like a twisted game of red light, green light. I motioned to my brother to walk even faster. The crunch of leaves under our feet seemed deafening in the quiet night. The faster we started to walk, it seemed the closer the man got to us. I could hear his footsteps getting louder behind us. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. We were approaching our house, but relief turned to terror when I heard the muffled scream of my brother as he was grabbed and pulled away. Time seemed to stand still as I watched helplessly. Then Buster sprang into action. He started barking like a rabid dog, and I swear to you, pulled the leash right out of my hands. In a flash of fur and fangs, Buster sunk his teeth into the man's leg. I could see the blood dripping down his leg as his screams pierced the night air. The sound caught the attention of people inside their houses. Lights flicked on, and doors opened as neighbors came outside to see what was happening. Our neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, came running out in her bathrobe. We frantically explained everything, while pointing at the man who was now trying to limp away. I had to put the leash back on Buster to keep him from chasing after the guy. Mrs. Johnson called the cops right away. She was a tiny little woman. She couldn't have done anything to stop that guy, even if she tried. But her presence was comforting as she walked us to our door and told our parents what happened. Police sirens wailed in the distance as officers arrived to question us and the neighbors. They caught the man limping down a sidewalk a few blocks over shortly after. One of the cops told us our dog was a hero, but we already knew that. As I hugged Buster tight that night, I remembered a verse my grandmother always recited. And Allah is the best of protectors, and He is the most merciful of those who show mercy. In that moment, I truly understood what those words meant. The incident left us shaken for weeks. Every shadow seemed menacing, every stranger a potential threat. But gradually, life returned to normal. We still walked Buster around the block, but never alone and never after dark. The experience taught us to always be aware of our surroundings, yet sometimes, late at night, I still wonder, what if Buster hadn't been there? What was that man planning to do? The questions linger, haunting me even years later.